Howdy all of you delicious people, I'm here to debut John Wick Chapter 4. So I feel like we don't go to a John Wick film anymore for the story, but in this film there actually is a good combination of story and action. And it seems like they really have gone on and were to have been very creative as far as the action is concerned in this film. And we also have like John Wick just kind of all over the place in this film, and we start out in certain places like Osaka, then we go to Berlin, then we go to Paris, and so it's kind of like all over the place in this film. And really when we get to Berlin, I was like, man, like there is some amazing like just visuals there. And then when we get to Osaka, I'm like, man, I really liked the action there. I really liked how we kind of dropped, finally, John Wick needing to, like, freaking shoot his way through everything because we really just realized that John Wick has, like, 1,000,000 bullets in this film to kill 1,000,000 people. And, yeah, we finally have to have at certain points where John Wick is to really need to come up with alternative things to kill people. And that's what I would go on and like most about a John Wick film, where it's like, hey, we don't have to go on and have John Wick murder everybody with bullets. Like we can even go on and have at certain movies that they kind of nod to the whole like pencil thing, which I thought was like cool to even have that be put into this movie also. But speaking of nods, we do have some tie-ins to prior films, or prior films. So anyways, if it feels like you need to go on and get a John Wick refresher, I would probably immediately go on and do that. At least for this John Wick film, I understood where the character was going. It feels like in other John Wick films, I'm like, I don't know why he's going with Halle Berry, doing the thing that he's doing. I don't know why he's going and seeing all these people. What the heck? I'm so confused. Some of the other John Wicks are kind of just all over the gosh darn place. And I was just like, just find the bouncing ball somewhere and just keep on going with it. But yeah, like there were other John Wick films, they were just freaking everywhere. And at least it feels that this John Wick film is easy to follow. So we come to find out in this movie that John Wick is taking on the Le Marquis de Gramont. And Marquis, of course, is to be a leader of this faction, this resistance against John Wick. Even when John is to try and early on in the film try to get his freedom, which of course is to not be granted to him. So we have to kind of make this whole journey to have John Wick needing to murder and kill tons and tons of people to eventually hope that he can get that freedom. And then we go on to the end of the film where we are to be left with a real like question mark or a possible cliffhanging like thing that is to make us assume that we're definitely going to go on and get some spin-off stories. And like also for this film, I have to state that there were two scenes that kind of did annoy me about this whole entire film. But then also I feel that like there was so much action in this movie that there is no way that Keanu could have done it all. That it feels like we had to go on and have like a plethora of different like Keanu doubles to do all of this stuff in this film. Like the car stuff, like the point where like Keanu was just going through like this whole building, and just killing all these men and running around, like all of that, and they shot from like a very far away, and like they shot from like up, so like obviously that's not Keanu. Like if that really was Keanu doing a good portion of that stuff, I would just be like, why wouldn't you cut to your actor? But yeah, but so much about like this movie was just visually amazing, especially when we get to Berlin. But two things that bugged me: there was obviously two scenes where dudes were just kind of walking, and I was like, why does this have to exist? You do this long stretch of walking just to do this short dialogue, and then you peace out, and I'm like, what? Like, there's obviously certain characters that didn't really have much to do in this film, so you had to give them something to do. But walking into a thing just to leave, and I'm like, we could have edited out a good chunk of this whole walking scene with Lawrence Fishburne, where he's going on and giving this whole like King's Speech thing, and just to go on of like, hey, John Wick, got something for you. I was like, why? Why? But it was interesting, the quoting and the whatever and the walking, but still. But here's a thing that made no sense, and they could have really just edited this out. We had Winston, who's going on, and he's just like walking to enter a area, and you just see all this like artwork and all of this stuff, and I'm like, man, this is like a really long walk just to get to this one person, just to state the dialogue that they're doing, just for Winston, just like, okay, peace out, A-Town, I'm outie. And I'm like, what? That just kind of felt like, okay, you're stretching the story, but I feel like there's just some stretching going on. We have certain characters that I kind of feel in this movie, like certain characters have kind of played this role before. Especially when we go on and we have like Kane, who's played by Donnie Yen. Like, didn't he already play a blind guy in another thing? And we also had like the Tracker, who's played by Shamir Anderson, which this guy had gone on and kind of played like a somewhat kind of like similar, like military-ish like guy in another show called Invasion. And so he's kind of playing a military-ish like guy that you're not quite sure exactly what side he's on. But it seems like he's on the side of Wick. But then, I don't know, like if somebody's going to go on and kind of toss him quite a bit of cashola, then like we're having him just kind of dance in between most of this film. And so we do kind of have like this warrior moment with the DJ, and I don't remember whether or not we had that in prior John Wick films. I feel like we probably did somewhere, and I completely forgot about it because it's been a while since I've seemingly seen other John Wick films. But we do have this kind of like the warrior moment, and if anybody needs to go on and remember the Warrior movie, the Warrior or Warriors, oh my god, whatever that goofy film is, where you have a bunch of gangs, and the guy's like, can you dig it? And they're like, yeah! And then the guy dies, and then they're like, oh man, like that guy's dead? Who killed that guy? That movie, that film, it bizarrely ended up getting adapted into a video game, which I started playing, but then I just kind of gave up at some point. But anyways, so with that said, the villains of this story is to, of course, be the Marquis de Gramont. And we come to find out that Marquis is to be the big baddie that is to be leading this faction, played by Bill Skarsgård. and of course Pennywise is the villain of the story. Because why isn't he a villain? Um, but yeah. Also, sadly enough, this is Lance Reddick's last movie because he had passed away, and it was kind of really interesting how this movie plays out, and so, anyways, with that said, I think it's about that time to just go into spoilers. Uh, it was really interesting seeing Scott Adkins in this movie also, because I'm like, oh my god, that's Scott Adkins. Like, I've seen him in so many other uh, movies where he's going on and, like, kind of being, like, the Jean-Claude Van Damme character, and to just kind of see him here doing this role is like, wow, this is kind of, like, really interesting. But he's still kind of bringing in what he's kind of known for and whichever, but still. Anyways, let's go on and let's double-fy this bad boy up because I think it's about that time to go into spoilers. Where can you go on and see this movie besides going into the theater to see it? I had seen this movie in an app called Zelifonic, Zelivonic. You can also go onto another app called Box HD. Box HD will have a logo that is to bizarrely have like kind of like Christmas decorations, and is to have like this kind of movie reel or bizarre looking barcode on it. And yeah, check either one of those out to check out John Wick Chapter 4. The only thing that is to be with the bootleg version that you're going to get from the current version of this John Wick film is that some of the dialogue, when it comes down to other languages, will not be there because currently it's in another language because somebody bootlegged it in another country. So yeah, so there'll be some dialogue missed, but who cares? You get to see John Wick Chapter 4 for free, and then you could go on and see John Wick Chapter 4 multiple times until it comes on to premium access, and then huzzah. Anyways, let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time you get to spoil this movie. Let's just go into spoilers. So the very beginning of this film, this is where we get kind of like the Lawrence Fishburne, Bowery King scene where he's going on and he's making his way to John Wick, and John Wick is just pie is just like hitting this piece of wood that is to have all this like kind of string and crap on it, and like John Wick has obviously like hit this thing quite often because the thing has blood on it. It has blood. It has the bloody blood. So we go on to have Bowery King that is going on and doing this whole quote and long live the king and all this stuff. And is to make his way on down to John Wick to, of course, give him a suit because that's what it seems that Lawrence Fishburne's character just does in this film. Just continues to give John Wick a suit. Whether he's going to get married in it or buried in it. But either way, here's your suit. We then go on to have, of course, the Harbinger making his way to Sharon, who, of course, is played by Lance Reddick. And we have the Harbinger that is to go on and give a notice to both Sharon and Winston that this building is going to need to be completely abandoned within an hour. I'm like, man, that doesn't seem like a lot of time. And so we try to have both Winston and Tron try and fight this. And so they seek out the source. So they both go on and make their way all the way to Marquis and speak out with him. So they go on to meet up with Marquis, and by the time that hourglass that the Harbinger is to deliver, the time runs out. We all of a sudden see the entire building, just like every floor just blows up. It's like, wow, okay, all right. So we go on to have Marquis, who is to be upset with both Winston and both Sharon for assisting John Wick in prior film. And so because of that, that's why he condemned that whole building. And so we have to go on and have one of the two of these characters are responsible for assisting John Wick. And we have Marquis who's to state to Winston, it's like, well, because you no longer have a building anymore, you no longer need a concierge. And immediately we go on to have Marquis who kills Sharon. And I was like, no! But then I was like, well, in all honesty, for what is to happen in real life, I was just like, well, great way to write a person out. And like how we can just kind of go on in this movie and have Sharon, who has that kind of last moment with Winston, and we really have it to where like Winston is like the only thing that I could have wrote on Sharon's like tombstone was that he was my friend. And I was like, man, yeah, there is some stuff there. There is some like heartbreaking stuff there, because the actor really did pass away. But yeah, really some impactful things. So we have that all happen, and so Winston is realizing that immediately he's like, well, like, I'm just gonna go to John Wick now. Because we need all of this resolved. So, John Wick, it seems, is busy. John Wick goes on to try and speak to the Elder. And so while John is making his way to the Elder, he's killing a bunch of the Elder's men to make his way to the Elder. And so John Wick is trying to speak to the Elder to try and get his wedding ring back, which he lost in the other film because he freaking lost a finger and lost his wedding ring. And so John Wick is to, of course, ask for his ring back and his freedom. Because for that ring, like, it was very sentimental because Helen gave that to John Wick. So yeah, and we see kind of like these random little flashes at certain points of John Wick and Helen together, like they're kissing and whichever, but moving on. So John Wick goes on and talks to the Elder, and the Elder basically just goes on and tells John, it's like, well, hey, like, the ring is gone, and also, like, so is your freedom. So John Wick, of course, not getting the answer that he wants. We, of course, go on to have John, who's like, well, like, you're gonna die. Pa! Dead. And then John, like, moves on to, like, okay, like, I gotta follow the bouncing ball, gotta figure out who I have alliances with next, and they just see what friends I have left. Because really for Jean, like there's nowhere really to hide. Like hiding for him is just very temporary. And to go on and be asking like anybody for anything at this point, they're just like, dude, my hands are tied. Like I have these people coming after like me for answers, and like and like I don't want to give you up, but also like I want to live. So we have Marquis that is to find Kane. And like the whole thing between Marquis and Kane is to at the beginning of it, Kane is like, dude, I'm retired. Dude, I don't want anything to do with this. Like send somebody else. And Marquis is like, well, like I sent you like a name, and so you're gonna read it. And Kane goes on and just starts to read it, and he realizes that it's Wick, and he's like, ugh, But yeah, but like Marquis goes on and threatens him. It's like, well, hey man, if you don't go on and if you don't do this, like, I'm gonna go after your daughter. I'm gonna kill your daughter. So, like a life for a life kind of thing. And so, like this whole movie is like Kane, who like every time like he farts, we just have like Marquis is like, well, hey, like remember your daughter. And Kane's like, F off. Shut the F up about my daughter. Like, dude, I'm going to be doing this. Like, shut up. Like, I get it. Daughter, yeah, I get it. It's a motivator. I get it. So, we have Kane that goes on and it's like, well, hey, like, he has to go on and Kane has to do it. If Kane doesn't do it, like, Marquis will just send somebody else. So it might as well be Kane to be the one. So and at least Kane would know where John is heading anyways. So that's of course when we go on to the Osaka Continental. So we have both Shimizu, and Akira. And Akira, of course, is Shimizu's daughter, of course. And like we think at first that she's just this girl behind this counter. Then it's like, oh no, it's actually Shimizu's daughter. And so there's this whole scene where the tracker guy comes in and he's talking to Akira, and she realizes that he has a dog, and she's like, yeah, like you can't come in here with a dog. And the tracker's like, well, it's an emotional support animal. And Akira's like, well, like, so like he emotionally supports you, and the tracker's like, no, it's the other way around. Like, I emotionally support it. So Akira's like, well, hey, as long as you go into your room, like, with the dog, then it's no problem. Immediately we have, like, the tracker with the dog, and it's just, he's all over the place. Like, he gives no F's. And we immediately have Shimizu, that is to just be like, well, hey, like, why is there a dog here in my hotel? And Akira is like, well, it's an emotional support animal. And then Shimizu is like, wait, well, hey, like, do you need an emotional support animal? But yeah, so we have Shimizu that is to go on and speak with Akira. And all this is to go on and have him be confronted by Chidi? Chidi? The head of uh, the Marquis de Gramont. I don't know if it's Chidi, but that sounds like a weird, goofy name, anyways. To be able to pronounce, and plus also I don't remember all the names of these characters. I'm sorry, but he's the main character. He's the main faction leader that comes in here. Besides Kane, and Kane will like kind of follow him shortly. But so we have both Kane and Chidi, and they are to meet up with Shimizu after Shimizu goes on and speaks with John Wick. And Shimizu and John Wick have this kind of moment where they're kind of just talking things out, and there isn't like a kind of a talk of like, well, hey, you owe me one kind of thing or anything. And it's just like they have always had like a really good alliance between one another, and Shimizu realizes that he just can't break that bond now. And so we have Shimizu that goes on to speak with both Kane and Chidi, and we come to find out that also, like, Kane and Shimizu are to be friends also. So I'm like, all right, I'm liking how this is all playing out. Where it seems like we have history between two characters, and so Shimizu goes on to try and get the guns away from the de Grimont, and they won't give up their weapons. And like we have Shimizu's guys that are kind of getting all their like bows and arrows and katanas and all that jazz in kind of these hidden compartments, because they're like, dude, we're gonna go to war, like this is gonna happen. So we go on to like hit this kind of like this light moment, and then shortly thereafter that we start to like whip out the swords and the arrows, and we then just have these huge fighting out moments. We have Kane that goes on, and he's kind of fighting in this kitchen, and he's taking all these kind of these little sensor things and just kind of popping them into a certain part of the room. And whenever any of these guys are to start like walking through these areas, it's kind of almost like a landmine in a way, where Kane immediately, when these sensor things go off, it gives like a ding dong kind of thing, and that immediately tells Kane where they are, so we can go on and start attacking them and start fighting them. And I thought that scene, I was like, okay, like this is a different way to like approach all of this. And we have Kane who doesn't like go and like re-grab those little sensor things back. But so anyways, we come to find out like war is broken out, and so Kira is with John Wick at the moment, and she is realizing it's like, oh crap, like my dad is fighting these guys. So Kira like turns to John Wick. He's like, well, hey, do you have a weapon? And John Wick like whips out his gun, and Akira like just disrobes and realizes that she has like a whole thing of armor right underneath this, and she's like, all right, like, because we're gonna have to kill a lot of people. So we not only have like the Degrement, the guys that are in these like suits, but we also have like all these guys with like all this armor on. And so I'm like, okay, we also have like John Wick, who has this kind of like Kevlar like suit on. So like we're kind of getting quite a bit of time where like John Wick is kind of using this like suit like as almost like a Batman kind of thing, where Batman would go on and like use his cape. Like we have like John Wick and everybody kind of using their suits as a way to like deflect bullets and whatever. So I was like, okay, this is kind of very interesting action sequences. So we go further and further in having John Wick trying to take down all of these people, and at some point we have Akira that ends up getting shot, and so we have Shimizu that is to find his daughter and is to kind of like throw her over his shoulder, and John Wick is just kind of tempted to like go on and stay with both of them, and Shimizu is telling John Wick, it's like, dude, you need to get out of here. Like, if anything, like, you're the problem, so get out of here. So we have Shimizu that tells John, it's like, oh, hey, go back the way you came, and hopefully you'll get out of here. So we have John that goes the way of which that he came, and here's where we get all these kind of like these paintings, and we start to realize that John is like running out of bullets, even though he has 1,000,000 of them, and we start to see John start to transition from, instead of having him having like this, of course, we go on to then have him use nunchucks and katanas, and I was like, yeah. The whole thing with John Wick and the whole like nunchuck thing, I was like, oh my god, this is awesome. I enjoyed this so much so. We also had at one point where John is to take one of the pendant things from the Gramont to eventually ask Winston later, like, hey, like, what does this mean? But so we have John that goes on to murder all these guys, and is to, of course, start to like run out of weaponry. So he's just kind of using everything at his disposal. He's grabbing guns from guys and trying to counter that in the best way possible, but a lot of this is also riding on the nunchucks. Until eventually Kane comes back into play here, and then John is to now have to face off against Kane, and with this fight scene, we go on to have where John, at certain points, is to try to be as quiet as possible, just kind of slip away, but is to also to try and have dialogue with Kane about like what had happened to like lead up to this moment. But so, and how like Kane had gotten tied because of his daughter and all that jazz to Marquis and all that. Yeah, you know, it's just a whole bunch of dialogue and so on and so forth. So we and how they're like good friends, and how like Kane is gonna have to go on and hurt his friends, and you know, it's just all that jazz. It's just all that dialogue. So we have at one point where Kane is to not know exactly where John is or if he's dead, and John does not want to go on and kill Kane because, one, John ran out of bullets, but also he just doesn't want to kill the guy anyways. There is a point here where we have Tracker coming in, and he starts kind of loading some bullets, but neither one of either Kane nor John get taken down, because we have Kane who kind of ducks and kind of maneuvers through all these areas, and John actually also like scrambles outside, and that's where eventually we have John who gets one of the medallions from one of these Gramont characters, and then he eventually makes his way to get to the Tracker. And the Tracker goes on to like seemingly be on the side of John Wick. And so it's like, okay, all right, like, so we're kind of seeing the dog kind of bite all these guys and kill them and so on and so forth. So, and we're kind of seeing that, like, John Wick, it's like, okay, I think I can trust this guy because he wants me alive. So we then, of course, have John needing to figure out, like, where he needs to go next, or where or what he should go on and try to do. So John goes back to speak with Winston about the Gramont and tells him, it's like, well, yeah, like, this is the faction that is trying to go on and try to kill you, and so we have John that realizes that he in prior film had destroyed his pass, and so we of course have Winston that is to go on and tell John, it's like, well, hey, like, you need to go back to get your family back. You need to go back to Berlin to work that out, to work that stuff out, and to get back with this family so you can go on and get your freedom. Because you're going to have to go on and you're going to have to face against the Marquis de Gramont. You're going to have to face these guys, and it eventually all comes down to this duel. By the end of the film, like, what is this? Like the Joshua Jackson movie, Paul Walker film, The Skulls, where by the end of that film, there's like this duel, and all that just kind of plays out. So we have John that realizes, like, okay, like, I'll go to Berlin because it's the only place I really have left. So by that time, we have the Tracker speaking with Marquis, and Marquis is just like, okay, like, who are you? And we consistently have the Tracker who's like, well, nobody. And, like, every time he goes on to meet another person, it's like, oh, who are you? And he's like, nobody. It's like, okay, Mr. Nobody. So, hence why throughout the whole film, like, they should have almost had in, like, the credit scene, they should have either called him Mr. Nobody, or they should have, yeah, just called him Tracker, because, like, really that's the only thing that I guess he could really have been called throughout this entire film. But so we have Marquis who's going on and just like, okay, like, guy that I don't know who you are, you're a stranger to me. Like, how much? How much, pretty much? You know, how much? So we have the Tracker who's like, well, like, I think they kind of bargain. Like, at first it's like 25 mil and like 25 million more after the job is done. And it's like, well, how about, like, I think he nickels and dimes him. He's like, well, 23 million or something along that route. And so, like, the guy's trying to lowball him. And so we have the tracker that is to go on and take the money. And then after that, we have Marquis that goes on and is to grab the guy's hand and stabs him in the hand. And we have Marquis that tells the tracker, it's like, well, hey, like, it's either you take the blade out or, like, you take your hand away. It's like, tell me how much that, like, this really does, like, matter to you. And what a tracker goes on and does is he completely just takes his hand away from the blade. And I'm like, okay, wow, like, yeah, I guess you can go on and just kind of re-sew up the hand maybe, but still, yeah, that's freaking crazy. So we have the tracker that goes on and shakes the hand of Marquis, his bloody hand, and walks away. So we go on to have John Wick making it to Berlin. And so this, of course, is Berlin, and it is the Ruska room, the Ruska Roma. And so, and eventually the tracker is to go on and call Marquis to go on and tell him that once he finds him, and assumes that all he has to do is just have it be like this finder's fee, and it's like, okay, like, transfer my money. And Marquis is just like, no, like, you have to do the job. Like, you have to find John Wick, you have to kill him. You can't just go on and just call me and just tell me he's there. It doesn't work that way. So John Wick goes on to meet with the people of Berlin. And so this all goes on to lead to him meeting up with Katya. That is to be his stepsister, with his family of people that he's kind of rejected. But anyways, John goes on to meet up with these Berlin people, and we have Katya that is to take John and string him up by these ropes, by this rope, because he's tied in whichever, so he can't just get away out of this. So Katya goes on and is kind of stringing John up to where, like, the further and further, like, the tighter things are getting. And so Katya is to ask John why he's there, and John Wick, of course, goes on to explain, and is to, like, state that he is to, like, try and kind of make amends for this family. And so Katya is like, well, if you're gonna go on and try to do that, you have to kill the person that killed one of our family. And so, like, once you go on and you square that debt, then, like, you'll be good with us. So that means John Wick has to go on and kill a character called Killa, who is Scott Adkins. And I was like, yeah, like, quite a bit of makeup for this character. Really was amazed by that. So John Wick goes on to have this guy called Klaus, and Klaus goes on and just smacks the crap out of John, but then goes to take Wick to Killa, and immediately once John makes it to this table, we come to find out that he's coming to this table not exactly alone. We have Wick met by Kane and the Tracker, and so Killa is just like, well, okay, like, we're gonna go on and we're gonna like do a 5-card stud to like see who's gonna make it out of here. The whole thing of it is that the whole thing is rigged. That this whole playing card game thing, and we can realize this because Killer is to have this kind of this flipping card trick, which I'm like, okay, there's going to be some kind of trick thing going on here. And so Killer goes on and is to just start seeing people's hands. So John, it seems, has some pairs, or a pair or pairs. And so it's like, ooh, wow, that's great. So we then go on to have Kane with an even better hand. But then the Tracker goes on and has this like royal, or this flush. And then Killa is like, well, like, man, like, those are good hands and all. But then we come to find out that Killa has 5 of a kind, which is impossible. So we have Killa that's just like, well, like I guess you guys should have realized that this was rigged all along. And so we start to realize that it's like, yeah, this is a waste of time. That there wasn't a really luck of chance of this anyways, and plus also for John, it's like, yeah, like, you're gonna leave here dead. So John eventually goes on to chase after Killa, and what eventually he goes on to do is like, he's fighting him through this rave, which here's where we're getting all this color. But yeah, John is also going and trying to take down all these mercenaries and all these characters that are tied to Kane and whoever. So John, what he does is he takes Killa and he falls and smashes his way onto these stairs, and then when John gets to Killa, he punches him in the face to try to get this this gold tooth from Killa. And so we have Kane and we have the Tracker. They're going on and like chasing after John, but really John just gets to Killa and gets what he needs and gets out of there to take the gold tooth back to Katya, and they go on and they make the bond with them, like putting it onto their arm, that they are familiar again. So kind of like when vampires would have familiars, and you would find that the humans would have these certain tattoos that would kind of say that they're connected as far as certain vampire-like tribes. But so we would then go on and have John be like, okay, well, I need to go on and I need to race back to Paris so I can confront Marquis de Gramont and be able to do this duel, because, of course, that is the certain rules of which they are to live by. So once Winston is to go on and find out, it's like, okay, like, John had kind of made that pact with Katya. Winston's like, okay, I'm going to bring this up to Marquis and state that Winston is going to go on and be John's second. And Marquis is to go on and tell Winston that is to go on and be like, well, hey, if I'm going to go on and I'm going to win this scenario here, I'm going to go on and I'm going to get my building back. You're going to rebuild and everything like that. You're going to put it back to the way it was. So we have Marquis that tells Winston, it's like, well, like, you do realize once you lose that you're going to die alongside John if he fails. So Winston's like, well, like, I already buried one friend, I might as well go on and bury myself after that. So, because yeah, that's what we come to find out when, like, John is with Lawrence Fishburne, King, and Winston, and they're talking about the gravestones and what Winston put on Sharon's, and Sharon and the King is talking about, it's like, dude, I put long live the King. Like, it's like that. Like, he already made his gravestone. He's like, he knew he was gonna die at some point. And so John probably never really made his. So we have John, and so he's making his way back to Paris to try and put together this challenge. So what happens is now when John is to make the challenge, we have him, of course, being in front of the Harbinger and in front of Marquis, and we have them kind of just start picking these cards that have these numbers on it that are random chance. Whoever is to get higher can be able to get, like, the duel done quicker, or what kind of weapons, or whichever. So, like, it's all this kind of random chance. And so we had John that wanted, like, the duel, like, right then and there, and Marquis wanted the duel at Sunset 1. We had a Marquis that wanted blades, and John wanted like pistols and pistols 1. And so it all came down to, like, okay, like, who's the second? And John stated that, like, okay, Winston's my second. And so Marquis ends up having Kane as his second, and also Kane is to go on to be Marquis's champion to go into this duel. So Marquis is not even going to want to go on and get involved in this duel. And I'm like, what the is that? Like, come on, man! Like, get your own hands dirty. If you weren't kind of bleeding with the tracker before, like, come on, man! Like, get your hands dirty. But I get it, it's like the whole part of the story, but still. Anyways, so the whole thing of it is that we have John that now needs to race to get to this church. That it all comes down to John needing to get to a safe passage throughout this whole entire night. So he's, like, running all over the place, because Marquis is telling his, like, second in command from his Grimald people. He's like, well, hey, like, you make sure that John doesn't get back here to duel. Like, you have to go on and you have to make a bounty on this guy's head. So the the amount of bounty continues to increase as the night is to go along. Like I think it starts like 25, 28 million till eventually like 40 million. When eventually the tracker is to want the amount upped, as again we consistently have Marquis who's to like continue to lowball, and Marquis is like, well, hey, like 35 million, and the tracker's like, dude, no, like I'm not taking that kind of deal. So here's where we start to get the scenario here where we're having John who is scrambling all over the place, and we get like this building where it's kind of from this kind of up perspective, like as if this entire thing is like being shot from this ceiling, and we're seeing like a downward thing of John, and here's where we kind of get this like video game, like 2D kind of experience. And so John is going through this building and starting to murder all of these people. And we have John who goes and he falls from this window down onto this car. And then right after that, we start to go through like all of these car sequences where all of the characters, like the Chidi guy is going on and trying to face off against Jean Wick while like they're going through all these cars and smashing to all these cars. John is consistently trying to like disarm all of these men, and they fall into these cars, or John is to take some of these cars and just bash into certain characters. It's crazy, but it's also freaking amazing. All the stuff that they accomplished here was like bra freaking vo. That was insane. And so we also had of course, Lawrence Fishburne moment where we had Lawrence who's giving John his suit to be married or buried, and he of course gives him that right as they're to go onto this boat, and they talk about the tombstones and trying to get John to as close as to the church that he possibly can. But yeah, he's still going to have to go on and make his way down the streets to find all of these random people like trying to get to him, and that's where the chase ensues with all these like kind of crazy car moments and everything like that. But so we have John who is forced to fight till sunrise, and we have this DJ who's consistently bringing on songs like Nowhere to Run, which of course is to be kind of like the Warriors kind of nod, where they had played that same song in that movie. So Warriors, come out and play. Anyways, moving on. So we would have John, who of course is to like right as it's almost to be like sunrise, and Marquis is like, well, I don't think he's gonna be here. I think he's gonna be late. We have Kane who goes on to find John, and they're like this huge amount of just steps to make it there. And John, like, I honestly love a movie where a person is falling down some stairs, but this was like really extensive. This was almost like Surf Ninja, when you would go on and just have the one guy who's at some point in that movie like falling forever down these stairs. And I was like, okay, like that was a bit much, but yeah, but that impact though, like I always like a scene in a movie where a person is going down a flight of stairs, because like it really looks like it's like very vicious, and it really looks like it really hurts. Um, and so yeah, so we have, of course, John, who gets like by like Chidi. He ends up getting like tossed down the stairs. So eventually, John is to have to be like met by Kane, and so both Kane and John are fighting all these guys together to then face off against Chidi. And Chidi goes on and just like takes a pencil to Chidi because he can't really go on and kill him, so he has to kind of take him down in a non-lethal way. And so both of these characters go on and luckily make it to the Marquise, do the duel, right as in like minutes or just seconds to like daybreak. And so it's like, okay, like he came here on time, so let's do this. So we then have both John and Kane who are going to do their like 30 sawed paces, but then once they go on and they do shots and then they miss one another or graze one another, they have to move closer and closer and closer until like they're probably like way too close to each other. So we have Winston and Marquis who's going on and loading the guns every time because we don't have like 30 bullets in one gun for John in this part of the movie. So the first shots between one another are to be hit in the arms, or to be kind of like hit off to the like the side. So we go on, it's like, okay, like you guys got to move up some paces. And here's where we start to get like hits in like the shoulder, I think, for John, and the stomach, I think, for Kane here. And so we continue to move closer and closer, and we get to the point where Marquis takes the gun from Kane and is like, well, all right, like I'm gonna go on and I'm gonna finally deliver John's final blow. And we have Winston who goes on to tell Marquis, it's like, well, hey, like Kane fired, but John didn't. And so John lifts his gun, shoots Marquis, and so now Marquis is dead. And so the Harbinger is like, okay, John, it's like, everything is completely wiped, slate clean. Like your business with us is over. And we are also to realize that Winston's building is to be reinstated, and Kane, him, and his daughter are to completely, seemingly be fine. Here's the thing, though. We had, and here's what kind of ties into the end credits scene. So, we go on to have Kane, who in the Osaka Continental goes on to eventually face off against Shimazu. And Shimazu and Kane are the best of friends and they don't want to fight here. But Shimazu's just stubborn. It's like, well, hey, we're going to have to do this. So we have them both fight. They duel one another. And Kane delivers Shimazu some stabbing blows to then kill Shimazu as Akira's watching on, still possibly bleeding to death. And from her wounds. And so when Akira is to want to go up against Kane is just like, no, just don't do it. And so Kane is going on and telling Akira, it's like, well, hey, like, I'll be waiting for you. like, I'll know at some point you're going to get your revenge, and like, so I'll know you'll, like, I know you're gonna come for me if I don't die by the end of this film. So Akira goes on to then be like holding on to her wounds, and is to be meeting Jean in the subway, and it's to mention, it's like, well, hey, if you don't kill Kane, I will. So the whole end credit scene is to eventually see that Kane is to make his way all the way back to his daughter, to then find Akira there, and it's like, well, hey, I'm coming for my revenge, mother. So we have John Wick that goes on to kill Marquis, and so we have John that goes on, and it is now like seemingly bleeding, and John walks off, and like, we had some really interesting moments between both Winston and John, where John is telling Winston, it's like, well, hey, like, any last tips? And like, Winston would just talk about, like, well, hey, like, isn't that a beautiful sunrise? Or he'd go on to just be like, well, hey, just have fun out there. Like, what a just amazing piece of coach. But I get it, because it's like, well, hey, man, like, you're skilled enough. What do I gotta tell you? So we have John that just takes this huge sit, just sits on down, and he is to supposedly just bleed to death, is what we have to naturally assume, because the next thing we see is that Winston and both the Bowery King are at both Helen and both John Wick's graves. Here's the thing, though. Like, for me, like, they're to state that it's like, well, hey, like, John Wick is dead, but maybe that there is some other John that's in existence that we never knew about, and maybe, like, John has always had this secret identity for the longest time that we don't know about, and so whenever John is to be addressed by anybody in his way of being an assassin, he's always been John Wick, but maybe there is some other John that eventually John Wick could be if he comes back. But I think a lot of people are all satisfied with this possibly ending John Wick. And so we even had at one point where there was this screening of this film where Keanu and I think the guy that directed this movie all kind of asked, like, the audience, like, well, hey, like, do you think that this character is dead, or do you think that this character is not dead? And I think a lot of people went with the route of, like, well, yeah, I think the character's dead. I think this is, like, a good way to just kind of finish off this character and go into other stories, which I don't know if I could just really just buy that. Like, I don't want to go on and just have Keanu, like, no longer do a John Wick film. Like, I really could get it that they could go on into these stories and just have us possibly with these other avenues or whatever. Like, I don't want there to be bizarrely, like, John Wick had a son or a daughter or something and that we never knew about. I think that would just be really just crappy or cheesy or whatever, because then why would John Wick need a dog? But we could have, like, Helen had this mysterious baby. No, I don't know. Like they could work in a bunch of weird crap, but yeah, hopefully, I would be satisfied either way with them no longer doing another Keanu Reeves John Wick thing and doing a bunch of spin-offs, because I feel like that's going to happen. or they can continue to keep coming back with us with this character, just like, oh no, he wasn't dead, no. And so yeah, so that's it. Let me know in the comments below whether you are to go on and want John Wick dead, you're fine with that, and you want a bunch of spin-offs, or you want Keanu to continue to be in these films. Regardless, if story-wise it even makes sense anymore. But yeah, I think I'm just gonna go on and just leave it at that. I went on and tried my best to try and recant everything that was to happen in this film. So let me know in the comments below how you felt about John Wick Chapter 4. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.